Millions of active soldiers, thousands of fighter jets, and a massive reserve of conventional military power. On the surface, it is a synchronized global coalition where more than 30 nations stand beneath a single unified banner. Yet the most severe threat to this military machine doesn't originate from a foreign adversary or a rival superpower. Behind closed doors, competing national interests and intense political friction are creating cracks along the alliance's foundation. An impenetrable external shield is only as effective as the political arm holding it. If that arm is fractured, the entire security apparatus becomes vulnerable. The 2022 invasion of Ukraine created a humanitarian crisis across the region. For NATO, it became a live, diagnostic stress test of the alliance's structural integrity. The initial response projected absolute cohesion, with intelligence, financial aid, and weapons flowing rapidly to the east. But that outward unity masked a fierce internal debate. Some member states demand aggressive military support, while others fear that involvement will pull the entire alliance into a wider, direct war. This creates intense internal pressure. You have a rigid defensive perimeter being pushed to its breaking point from within. The conflict forces the alliance to confront a difficult reality. These nations share a common enemy, but they remain divided on how to actually fight them. In 1949, European economies had collapsed, and major cities were reduced to ash. At the same time, the Soviet Union was expanding its influence across Eastern Europe, pushing a rival ideology backed by a massive military presence. In response, 12 founding nations drafted a countermeasure and signed the North Atlantic Treaty. The treaty rests on a single structural pillar, Article 5. This is an ironclad guarantee. An attack on one member is treated as an attack on all 12. This binary logic worked because the threat was unambiguous and the geographic boundaries of the alliance were absolute. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The primary adversary the alliance was built to contain suddenly vanished. This left NATO with an immediate dilemma. Why should a heavily armed defensive coalition continue to exist without its original enemy? Rather than dissolving, NATO reinvented itself. Over the following decades, it steadily moved its borders eastward into former Soviet territories. This expansion shifted the alliance's focus. It moved from strict border defense toward complex operations elsewhere, including peacekeeping in the Balkans and counterterrorism in Afghanistan. By surviving its own victory, NATO underwent a massive mission creep, transforming from a tight, single-purpose pact into a multi-directional global stabilizer. Member nations argued they were supporting independent democracies. Moscow, however, perceived a creeping military encirclement moving toward its borders. For decades, that geopolitical pressure steadily accumulated, creating a mounting tension across Eastern Europe. Eventually, that pressure snapped, resulting in the 2022 invasion of Ukraine. This crisis has forced nations that share a border with Russia into friction with Western member states that feel geographically insulated from the immediate fallout. These internal disputes over Ukraine are symptoms of a much larger structural imbalance within the alliance. Despite the appearance of 30-plus nations standing shoulder to shoulder, this is not an equal partnership. This chart compares military expenditure across the alliance. One massive block represents United States spending, which dwarfs the combined contributions of every other member state. This financial disparity translates directly to capability. The U.S. provides the alliance with an unrivaled supply and advanced technology, global intelligence, and strategic air dominance. It also provides the ultimate deterrent, a blanket of American nuclear protection that covers the European continent. Because of this asymmetry, the physical security of Europe relies almost entirely on the capability and the political will of one nation. The consequence of this imbalance is that any policy shift or political fatigue in the United States instantly destabilizes the entire global alliance. A system built around a single load-bearing structure collapses the moment that central pillar wavers. In an increasingly unstable world, the real battle for NATO's survival won't be fought on a foreign border. It will be decided within its own headquarters and the ballot boxes of its largest contributor. A single 120mm sabot round exits a tank barrel at over 3,500 miles per hour. Behind that kinetic energy is an alliance of 32 nations, representing over half of the global economy. Right now, this coalition is projecting a highly visible, united front, experiencing a surge in relevance. We traditionally measure this strength in steel. Carrier strike groups deploying dozens of fighter jets across open waters project a physical footprint that few adversaries can match. The war in Ukraine forced the alliance to mobilize that hardware. Land forces returned to defensive trenches in Eastern Europe, awakening the organization to its original Cold War purpose. But counting aircraft and artillery shells creates a dangerous blind spot. High-end military equipment only provides the appearance of security. The greatest vulnerability facing this coalition doesn't wear an enemy uniform. It is the quiet, ongoing erosion of internal trust between the member states themselves. If the political fault lines beneath the surface finally fracture, all that external armor becomes irrelevant. To find those fault lines, you have to look away from the battlefield and into the committee rooms. The most persistent source of friction is the budget. Members are encouraged to spend 2% of their gross domestic product on defense. Yet for decades, several major economies have failed to hit that target. This chart shows defense spending by member state. American spending dwarfs the European average, leading Washington to argue it carries the financial weight. European leaders counter by redefining the metric, arguing stability depends on diplomatic and economic commitments, not just weapons. Look closely at this map of the alliance's southeastern flank. Turkey physically connects Europe to the Middle East and controls maritime access to the Black Sea, making it geographically indispensable. Knowing its strategic leverage, Ankara frequently acts as an independent operator, pursuing sovereign policies that directly contradict the positions of its allies. Whether managing border security in Syria or negotiating arms deals, Turkey repeatedly demonstrates that national interests often override collective directives. When a single member exercises that kind of independence, the bureaucratic machinery slows down, delaying decisions that require immediate action. The Russian invasion of Ukraine forced historically neutral nations to reconsider their survival strategies, prompting a sudden rush to join the alliance. Adding highly capable militaries to the roster physically extends the defensive perimeter and brings fresh resources into the command structure. But that same movement triggers aggressive responses from adversaries. Moscow views any Eastern enlargement as a direct, provocative threat to its own security. Every signature admitting a new state redraws the map, shifting the entire balance of power across the European continent. This growth introduces a mechanical problem. By charter, the organization cannot act without absolute, unanimous agreement from every single member government. This diagram illustrates plain paradox of expansion. Achieving consensus among 12 founding nations was relatively fast. Finding immediate agreement among 32 competing priorities, economies, and political systems makes rapid mobilization difficult. Broadening the alliance creates a formidable external shield, while simultaneously stretching the internal decision-making process to its limit. That bureaucratic delay is a massive liability in the next generation of conflict, where physical borders are bypassed entirely. Artificial intelligence, autonomous drone swarms, and the weaponization of orbital networks have eclipsed traditional battlefields. A coordinated digital assault or a hypersonic strike unfolds in minutes. The requirement for absolute political consensus creates a specific delay between the detection of a threat and the authorization of a collective response. In a conflict environment where algorithms dictate the pace, any hesitation caused by internal political friction becomes a vulnerability that an adversary can exploit. History does offer a counterweight. When faced with genuine existential crises, these nations have consistently managed to put aside their differences and act as a unified force. This entire security architecture rests on political unity and mutual trust. Navigating the competing priorities of 32 nations to secure an entire continent requires exceptional leadership. Will these internal fault lines dictate the future of global security, or will the alliance find a way to adapt and emerge stronger? Let us know what you think in the comments, and subscribe for more in-depth analyses of global affairs.